Welcome to Nikki Woo Cozy Stories. I'm your host, Nikki. Tonight, we begin Ancient Sorceries by Algernon Blackwood, a strange and atmospheric tale of an ordinary traveler in an old French town, and the unsettling feeling that some places may remember us before we remember them. This is part 1 of our 3-part journey. So if you enjoy gentle Gothic stories, mysterious old places, and bedtime listening with just a touch of the supernatural, I hope you'll subscribe and join me for the rest of the story. For now, dim the lights, get comfortable beneath the covers, and let the day grow quiet around you. Our story begins aboard a train traveling through France, where Arthur Vezin is about to make one very unusual decision. Arthur Vezin had never considered himself an adventurous man. He traveled, certainly. He enjoyed mountains, quiet roads, old villages, and the pleasant solitude of places where no one expected anything from him. But adventure was another matter entirely. Adventure required sudden decisions, and Arthur Vezin was not a man who made sudden decisions. He was a gentle, somewhat timid Englishman, well into middle age, who preferred observing the world to disturbing it. He disliked crowds. He disliked arguments. He disliked drawing attention to himself. And on this particular September afternoon, as the train carried him steadily northward through France, Arthur Vezin wanted nothing more adventurous than a quiet journey home. Unfortunately, the railway carriage was anything but quiet. It was crowded with English travelers returning from their holidays. There were bags beneath the seats and parcels overhead. Newspapers rustled. Someone was discussing luggage. Someone else was discussing dinner. And 2 men near the windows had been arguing for nearly 20 minutes about the quickest route to London. Their voices seemed unnecessarily loud to Vezin. Everything about them seemed unnecessarily loud. He sat quietly in his corner, looking out the window. Beyond the glass, France slipped peacefully past. Fields stretched beneath the soft September light. Here and there, woods had begun to show the first suggestion of autumn, though summer had not entirely released them yet. The leaves were still mostly green, but now and then a branch flashed yellow in the afternoon sun. Small farms appeared and disappeared. Church towers rose briefly above the distant trees, and occasionally the railway passed a cluster of stone houses, and Vezin found himself wondering what it might be like to stop there. Not because there was anything remarkable about them. Quite the opposite. They seemed quiet, and that was enough. For several weeks he had been traveling alone in the mountains, walking whenever the weather allowed it, sleeping in little inns, eating simple meals, and speaking to almost no one unless necessity required it. And he had enjoyed himself enormously. Now, civilization was gathering around him again. Schedules, tickets, crowded stations, people asking questions, people answering them, people discussing things that seemed to Vezin perfectly capable of remaining undiscussed. He sighed and turned a little farther toward the window. Across from him sat a Frenchman who had been there since the previous station. The man had said very little, and Vezin appreciated him for this. They had exchanged the small courtesies required between travelers, and then left one another peacefully alone. The Frenchman appeared to be somewhere near Vezin's own age. He had a narrow face, dark eyes, and a small pointed beard already touched with gray. Once or twice, Vezin had noticed him watching the countryside. Not casually, almost expectantly. But Vezin thought nothing of it. The train continued north. Then, sometime late in the afternoon, it began to slow. Vezin glanced through the window. A little station had appeared beside the tracks. There was nothing remarkable about it. A narrow platform, a station master, a few signs, and several people waiting beneath the awning. But beyond the station, the land rose sharply, and there, high above the railway, stood a town. Vezin leaned closer to the glass. It climbed the hillside in crooked layers of roofs and chimneys. Its houses gathered closely together as though they had been built in another century and had never found reason to move apart. At the highest point stood the remains of an old cathedral. Its broken towers rose above the town against the pale September sky. And behind it stretched wooden hills. The whole place seemed caught in the warm, slanting light of late afternoon. And for some reason, Vezin could not look away. The train rolled slowly into the station, and brakes sighed beneath the carriage. The doors opened. Voices called along the platform. A porter pushed a trolley past the window. The noisy English travelers scarcely noticed. One of the men continued explaining why another railway line would have been faster. But Vezin was no longer listening. He was looking up at the town. There was something about it. He couldn't have said what. It wasn't especially beautiful. He had seen grander places, older places, more picturesque places. Yet something in that cluster of roofs beneath the ruined cathedral touched him with a peculiar intimacy. It seemed familiar. The thought surprised him. He had never been here before, and he was quite certain of that. Still, the sensation remained, and beneath it came another, a desire, simple, immediate, almost childish. He wanted to get off the train. Vezin frowned. The idea was absurd. He had a ticket. He had a route. He had intended to continue north. There was no reason whatsoever to spend the night in an unknown town simply because he had happened to notice it through a railway window. He settled back into his seat. The decision was made. He would remain where he was. Then he looked at the town again. A minute later, Arthur Vezin was standing. He reached for his bag, and the Frenchman across from him looked up sharply. Vezin nearly sat down again. Instead, somewhat embarrassed by his own behavior, he gestured toward the window. "I think I shall stop here for the night." The Frenchman stared at him. There was something in his expression Vezin did not understand. Surprise, certainly, but something else as well. "Here? Why, yes." Vezin smiled. "I've been traveling for some time. It looks quiet." The Frenchman glanced toward the window, then back at Vezin. For a moment, he seemed about to say something. But he didn't. Vezin lifted his own bag and moved toward the carriage door. The platform outside was nearly empty now, and the conductor was already calling for passengers to board. Vezin stepped down. The moment his feet touched the platform, he felt strangely relieved. The carriage had been too crowded, too noisy. The air outside was cool and pleasant, and above him, the little town waited in the September sunlight. Behind him came the slam of the doors. A whistle sounded. Then the Frenchman appeared suddenly at the carriage window. He leaned out. His expression had changed completely. "Sir!" Vezin turned. The train began to move. The man called something in French. The wheels clattered. Vezin stepped closer, trying to hear. "What?" The Frenchman raised his voice. But the train was gathering speed now. Most of his words vanished beneath the noise. Vezin caught only the end. because of the sleep." The train moved farther down the platform. "And because of the cats." Then he was gone, and Vezin stood perfectly still. The last carriage passed him. The rails hummed, and for several seconds the sound of the train remained, diminishing steadily into the distance. Then that too disappeared. Silence returned, and Arthur Vezin looked down the empty track. Sleep? Cats? He gave a small, uncertain laugh. Perhaps he had misunderstood. That seemed most likely. He turned toward the station. Beyond it, a road climbed steeply toward the town. His bag suddenly felt heavier than it had on the train. And for the first time, Vezin wondered whether getting off had been a mistake. Then a breeze moved down from the wooded hillside, and it carried a faint smell of leaves and earth. Above him, the old roofs caught the last warm light. Somewhere among them, a bell began to ring. Slowly, softly, the sound drifted down the hill. Vezin looked up. Whatever uneasiness the Frenchman's warning had caused began almost immediately to fade. After all, he told himself, he was only staying for one night. Tomorrow morning he would continue his journey. There was no reason to think any more about it. He picked up his bag and began to climb toward the town. The road into town climbed steadily from the station, turning first between open fields and low stone walls, before disappearing among the houses above. Arthur Vezin walked slowly. There was no reason to hurry. The train had gone, his decision had been made, and for the first time that afternoon, there was nowhere in particular he needed to be. He found the feeling unexpectedly pleasant. The September sun was already lowering behind the hills, warming the stone around him and laying long shadows across the road. Somewhere in the grass, insects hummed lazily, and now and then a breeze came down from the wooded slopes carrying the faint smell of leaves and earth. With every step upward, the railroad began to belong a little more to another world. Soon the houses began to gather around him. At first, they stood apart, with small gardens and weathered gates between them. Higher up, the streets narrowed and the buildings pressed together beneath crooked upper stories and wooden balconies. The town was older than it had appeared from below, and doorways leaned slightly out of the square. Tiny windows set deep within thick walls. Vines wandered across pale stone, and narrow passages slipped beneath houses into hidden courtyards. Nothing seemed to have been cleared away simply because it was old, and Vezin liked that. It gave him the impression that the town had been allowed to grow old in peace. He stopped beside a small fountain and rested his bag upon the edge. Water slipped quietly into the mossy basin. A few women talked beneath a nearby tree, and somewhere above them, the ruined cathedral rose over the rooftops, its broken towers caught in the evening light. Vezin decided he would walk there in the morning. Tomorrow morning, after breakfast. Then he would return to the station and continue his journey. The thought settled comfortably in his mind. He asked one of the women if there was an inn nearby, and she pointed farther up the hill. There was an old place not far from the cathedral, she told him. Quiet, clean. Travelers sometimes stayed there. That was enough for Vezin. He thanked her and continued upward. As he walked, the strange feeling he had experienced on the train returned. Not strongly, only a suggestion, a sense that he somehow knew this place. Not a particular street or doorway. Nothing he could name. More like entering a room after many years away and feeling, before memory supplied the details, that one had once been happy there. Vezin slowed. The The thought was absurd. He had never been here before. He knew that. And yet, the feeling lingered. Then a cart rattled around the corner behind him, breaking the moment, and Vezin smiled at himself and moved on. He found the inn a few minutes later. It stood behind an arched entrance on one of the quieter streets, its painted sign so weathered that whatever image had once appeared there had almost vanished. Beyond the arch was a small courtyard, and Vezin stepped inside, and immediately liked it. Vines climbed the walls, geraniums stood along a wooden gallery above. A stone trough rested beneath an old iron pump, and several small tables had been set beneath an awning. The afternoon sunlight reached only half the courtyard now. One wall glowed softly gold. The other had already fallen into cool shadow. Vezin set down his bag. For a moment, no one appeared. He did not mind. After the railway carriage, the silence felt luxurious. Then, an elderly woman came through the doorway at the far side. She was stout and plainly dressed, with gray hair drawn beneath a small cap. There was nothing unusual about her appearance, although Vezin noticed that she moved with surprising lightness for a woman of her size.
"You require a room, monsieur, if you have one. For how long?" "Only tonight, I think." The woman looked at him. For just a moment, Vezin had the impression that his answer amused her. Then she smiled. "Of course." She led him inside. The inn was dim and cool, its walls paneled in dark wood polished smooth with age. And somewhere beyond the hall came the comforting smell of supper being prepared. Onions, butter, perhaps thyme. And Vezin realized suddenly that he had eaten very little since morning. His room was small but pleasant, with a high bed and an open window overlooking the roofs below. And beyond them, the countryside spread away in soft folds of green and gold until it disappeared into the evening haze.
"Oh, this will do very well," Vezin said. The landlady smiled. "You like quiet places?" It was not quite a question. "Very much." "Then you should sleep well here tonight." Something in the words brought back the stranger on the train. Because of the sleep, Vezin turned, but the woman was simply smoothing the coverlet with one hand. He felt faintly foolish. "May I have supper later?" "Whenever you wish." The answer delighted him. No fixed hour, no hurry. "Perfect. My daughter will see to you." The woman moved toward the door. Vezin thanked her, then turned once more toward the window. By the time he looked back, she was gone. He had not heard the door close. For a moment he listened. Then, from somewhere below, came the faint clink of dishes and a woman's voice from the kitchen. Ordinary sounds, comforting sounds. Vezin smiled at his own imagination. He washed the dust of the journey from his hands and face and settled into the chair beside the window. Evening was beginning to fall across the town. Smoke rose slowly from the chimneys. A church bell sounded somewhere above the roofs, and one by one, windows began to glow. Vezin watched them with satisfaction he could hardly explain. He had meant to stay only because he was tired of the train. Now he found himself wondering whether one night might be too little. He could walk to a cathedral in the morning, perhaps take luncheon here afterward. There was no real harm in catching a later train. The thought was hardly formed before a knock sounded at the door. "Come in." A young woman entered carrying a small tray, and Vezin, who had been thinking only of supper a moment before, forgot about it entirely. She was young, perhaps in her 20s, with dark hair and a simple dark dress. Nothing about her appearance was theatrical or unusual. She might have been the daughter of any innkeeper in any quiet French town. Yet, the moment Vezin saw her face, a feeling passed through him so quickly that he caught his breath. He knew her. That was his first thought. Not that he had seen her somewhere. Not that she reminded him of someone. He knew her. For one impossible instant, the certainty was absolute. Then reason returned. The young woman smiled. "Good evening, monsieur." Vezin rose somewhat awkwardly. "Good evening." She placed the tray upon the table. "My mother said that you wished to have supper." "Oh, yes, thank you. We have onion soup tonight, and bread. There is also chicken if you'd like it." "Oh, that sounds very good." She nodded. Vezin was still looking at her. He knew it was impolite, but he could not quite help himself. There was something in her face, something not familiar enough to remember, and yet too familiar to dismiss. The young woman seemed aware of his attention, though she did not appear embarrassed by it. "My name is Ilsa," she said. "Arthur Vezin?" "I know." He looked surprised. A little laughter came into her eyes. "My mother told me." "Oh, of course." Vezin laughed too. For reasons he could not have explained, he felt suddenly shy. Ilsa turned toward the door. "I must go down again before the soup is boiled." "Oh, yes, certainly." She paused. For the briefest moment, she looked directly into his eyes. And there it was again, that strange shock of recognition. Only this time, Vezin had an uncomfortable impression that Ilsa felt it too. Then she smiled. "I will see you downstairs," and left. Vezin remained where he was. He listened to her steps moving away, or tried to. The old floorboards should have carried the sound easily, but after the door closed, there was only silence. A moment later, he heard her voice from below, laughing at something in the kitchen. Vezin went back to the window. The sky beyond the roofs had deepened into violet. Far above, the broken cathedral tower stood black against the last light. He thought again of the railway, the stranger leaning from the window. Sleep. And the cats. But the warning seemed strangely out of place here. The town did not feel dangerous. It felt peaceful. More peaceful, perhaps, than anywhere he had been in weeks. And as Vezin stood looking down at the quiet roofs, listening to the faint sounds of supper being prepared below, another thought came to him. A thought that seemed entirely reasonable. There was really no need to decide tonight what time he would have to leave tomorrow. Morning would be soon enough. And for now, he was very glad he had stayed. Arthur Vezin slept deeply that night. So deeply that when he opened his eyes the next morning, he lay for several moments without knowing where he was. Sunlight had already reached the curtains. Somewhere outside, pigeons shifted along the roofs, and from the street below came the softened sounds of carts, voices, and doors opening for the day. Then memory returned. The train, the warning, the climb up the hill, the old inn, and Ilsa. And the thought of her. Vezin smiled. He dressed and went downstairs. Breakfast waited for him in the little room beside the courtyard, where sunlight fell across the table and warmed the dark wooden floor. There was coffee and bread and butter and preserves, and Vezin ate with an appetite that surprised him. The landlady appeared at once. Ilsa did not appear at all. Vezin found himself looking for her. A voice from the kitchen, a step in the passage, a glimpse of her dark dress beyond the doorway. Nothing. He was mildly disappointed by this, and immediately annoyed with himself for being so disappointed. He had known the young woman for only a few minutes. It was ridiculous. Besides, he had plans. He would see the cathedral that morning, take luncheon somewhere in town, and then catch the afternoon train. There was no reason to remain longer. By 10 o'clock, he was walking through the old streets with the pleasant certainty that the day belonged entirely to him. In daylight, the town seemed even older than it had the evening before. The streets twisted around the hillside without any obvious plan. Stone stairways disappeared between houses. Narrow passages opened suddenly into the little courtyards and then closed again behind him. Shops sat beneath crooked beams and faded signs, their windows filled with bread, cloth, books, and household things that seemed to have changed very little in over 100 years. Vezin wandered slowly. He stopped at a bookseller's window. He watched a baker arrange loaves behind a counter. He stood for several minutes beneath an archway, looking down across the valley. And all the while, that strange sense of familiarity remained. Not strong enough to frighten him, only enough to trouble the edges of his thoughts. At one corner he left without thinking. A moment later, he stopped. Why had he turned? Had he intended to continue straight toward the cathedral? Yet the lane before him felt oddly familiar. He could almost imagine what lay beyond the bend. A wall, a narrow flight of steps, a small carved figure above a doorway. The thought came so clearly that Vezin stood still. Then he walked forward. There was indeed a wall, and the steps, and above the doorway, worn almost smooth by weather, was a little stone figure. Vezin stared at it. A chill moved lightly across his shoulders. He had not seen this place before. He was certain of that. Perhaps he had glimpsed the lane from above the previous evening. Perhaps the town was simply beginning to repeat itself in his mind. Old walls resembled older walls. Stone steps resembled other stone steps. That was all. He continued to the cathedral, but the incident stayed with him. By the time he reached the ruins, the sun stood high over the town. The cathedral had once been enormous. Now, only broken walls, fragments of arches, and weathered columns remained, rising from grass and weeds beneath the open sky. Vezin walked through the old nave slowly. There was a great stillness there. No roof, no congregation, no music. Only wind moving through the grass where generations of people had once knelt. He found a fallen stone near the edge of the ruins and sat. From there, he could see nearly the whole town. Roofs descended the hillside below him. Beyond them lay the railway. The sight reminded him of his plan. He took out his watch. Plenty of time. If he ate luncheon soon and returned to the inn for his bag, he could reach the station comfortably before the afternoon train. The decision restored him. He had enjoyed the town. He was glad he'd stopped, but one night was enough. He rose, and as he turned toward the path, someone spoke behind him. "You're leaving?" Vezin knew that voice before he looked. Ilse stood yards away, near the broken wall, a small basket hanging from one arm. He felt an immediate and rather foolish pleasure at seeing her. "I am," he said, "this afternoon." Ilse looked toward the valley. "So soon?" Vezin laughed. "I only intended to stay one night." "Yes." There was something peculiar in the way she said it. Not disbelief, only amusement. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Gathering herbs for my mother." She lifted the basket slightly. Vezin crossed the grass toward her. In the full daylight, she seemed younger than she had the evening before. More ordinary. And yet, as he approached her among the broken walls of the cathedral, yesterday's strange recognition returned in a different form. This time, it was not simply Ilsa who seemed familiar. It was the sight of her here. The dark dress against the pale stone, the grass moving around her feet, the ruined arch rising behind her into the open sky. For one bewildering instant, Vezin felt that he had stood with her somewhere like this before. Not yesterday, not anywhere he could remember, but long ago. The sensation passed almost immediately, leaving behind nothing he could grasp. He found himself studying her face. Ilsa noticed. "You look at me as though you're trying to remember something." The word startled him. Vezin laughed, but not comfortably. "Oh, do I?" "Yes." "And what do you think I'm trying to remember?" Ilsa looked at him for a moment. Then she lowered her eyes to the herbs in her basket. "I don't know." Vezin had the distinct feeling that she did. Before he could ask anything more, she began walking toward the path. "You should eat," she said, "if you mean to catch your train." "Yes, quite right." He followed her. They descended from the cathedral together. Ilsa knew paths through the town that Vezin had not noticed before. She led him down stone stairs, beneath narrow archways, through passages where the houses seemed almost to touch overhead. Once or twice Vezin tried to remember the route. But he couldn't. He was too aware of Ilsa beside him. They came into a small square that Vezin did not recognize. A fountain stood at its center, and several people sat beneath the trees. Ilsa stopped. "I have to go this way." Vezin glanced at his watch. Still time. "Will I see you before I leave?" Ilsa smiled. "I think so." Something about that answer made him hesitate. You think so?" She had already turned away. Vezin watched her cross the square and disappear through a narrow passage. For a moment, he considered following. Then he laughed at himself. He was behaving like a schoolboy. He found a small cafe instead and ordered luncheon. The meal took longer than expected. Not because the service was poor, quite the opposite. Everything arrived pleasantly, unhurriedly, one thing after another. Bread, cheese, a little dish of vegetables, wine, then coffee. Vezin checked his watch again. He still had enough time. Just enough. He paid quickly and set off toward the inn. At least, he believed he was heading toward the inn. 10 minutes later, he realized he had never seen the street before. He stopped, looked back. The lane behind him divided in two. He could not remember which branch he had taken. This was absurd. The inn could not be far away. He asked an old man standing in a doorway. The man pointed uphill. Vezin thanked him and hurried on. At the next corner, a woman told him the inn was downhill. He stared at her. "Down?" She nodded. He turned back. The street seemed different now. Not dramatically. Nothing had changed. And yet every familiar corner appeared to have shifted just enough to make him uncertain. He walked faster. His bag was still at the inn. The train would not wait. At one point he found himself back at the same fountain where he had parted from Ilsa. That stopped him completely. He had been walking for nearly 20 minutes. How could he possibly be here again? He checked his watch. Oh, the train. Vezin hurried across the square and entered the first lane that seemed familiar. Then another. Then another. A church bell began to ring somewhere above him. He counted automatically. 1, 2, 3. The sound rolled across the roofs. Vezin broke into an undignified half-run. At last he saw the faded sign of the inn, Relief flooded through him. He crossed beneath the archway and found the landlady in the courtyard. "My bag," he said. "Quickly, please. I'm afraid I've lost track of time." The woman looked at him calmly. "The train?" "Yes." She glanced toward the sky. "Oh, you will not catch it." Vezin reached for his watch again. At that exact moment, faint and distant below the hill, came the whistle of the locomotive. He froze. For several seconds there was silence. Then came the muted sound of wheels gathering speed far beneath the town. The afternoon train was leaving. Without him. Vezin stood in the courtyard, breathing harder than the short run had justified. He should have been angry. Annoyed, certainly. He had missed his train because he had allowed himself to wander around like a fool. Now he would have to spend another night. He looked toward the archway. Nothing prevented him from walking down to the station and checking the timetable. There might be another train later. He should ask. He should make arrangements. Instead, he felt relief. And not mild relief. A warm, unmistakable easing inside his chest. The train was gone. The decision had been made for him. He did not have to leave. Vezin frowned. That feeling was not right. He knew it wasn't right. And yet, it remained. Behind him came the soft sounds of footsteps. He turned. And Ilse stood in the doorway. She had changed her dress. Her dark hair had been gathered loosely at the back of her neck. "You missed it," she said. Vezin stared at her. "Yes." Ilse didn't look surprised. "You said you thought you would see me again before I left." For the first time, her smile unsettled him. Only slightly. He tried to make light of it. "And you were right." "Yes." "And how did you know?" Ilse tilted her head. "I didn't." Vezin looked at her. Something moved in the silence between them. Then Ilse crossed the courtyard and lifted his bag from where it had been placed near the stairs. "You'll need your room again." She started towards the doorway. Vezin followed. Halfway across the courtyard, he stopped. "Ilse." She turned. "Was there another train tonight?" For a moment, she simply looked at him. Then she smiled. "Yes." Vezin blinked. "There is?" "At 8. He glanced instinctively towards the archway. He could still leave. There was plenty of time. All he had to do was eat an early supper, collect his bag, walk down the hill, and get on the train. Simple. Ilse waited. Vezin looked at her. Then at the quiet courtyard. Sunlight touched the geraniums along the gallery. Somewhere in the kitchen, onions were frying in butter. He could hear water running softly into the stone trough. Nothing here seemed threatening. Nothing here seemed wrong. And the thought of rushing down to the station suddenly felt absurd. "I suppose," he said slowly, "tomorrow will do just as well." Something changed in Ilse's face. So quickly Vezin could not have described it afterward. Satisfaction? Perhaps. Recognition? Or only pleasure. "That is what I thought," she said. She carried his bag upstairs, and Vezin remained alone in the courtyard. For the first time since arriving in the town, he felt genuinely uneasy. Not because he had missed the train, because he had discovered another was coming. And still, didn't want to leave. He walked beneath the archway and looked down the street. An old woman sat sewing beside an open window. 2 men spoke quietly near the corner. A child leaned against a doorway. None of them appeared to be looking at him. And yet, Vezin had the strange sensation that the whole street knew what had just happened. That somewhere, without anyone speaking or moving, a message had paused through the town. He is staying. From the roofs above came a low, long cry. Another answered from farther away. Vezin looked up. A gray cat sat on a chimney opposite of the inn. For several moments it remained motionless against the pale evening sky. Then, with effortless grace, it slipped over to the other side and disappeared. Arthur Vezin stood beneath the archway for another moment. Tomorrow, he told himself. He would leave tomorrow. And this time, he would make certain of it. And now, the little French town grows quiet beneath the evening sky. The last light fades from the stone walls. High above the rooftops, the ruined cathedral darkens against the hills, while narrow streets disappear one by one into shadow. At the old inn, a lamp glows softly behind the window. And somewhere in the kitchen, the faint scent of onions and butter still lingers in the air. Water slips gently into the stone trough in the courtyard. And along the rooftops, something moves, softly, silently. Arthur Vezin has told himself that he will leave tomorrow. For tonight, he remains here, beneath the old roofs, within the winding streets, and among people who seem to know something about him that he has not yet remembered. But there is no need for you to follow him any farther tonight. The train is gone. The town is still. The night has settled gently over the hill. So close your eyes, let the old streets fade into darkness, and imagine the soft ringing of a distant bell carried through the cool September air. Rest now. You are safe. You are loved. Thank you for listening to Nikki Woo Cozy Stories, created by Nicole T. Woodard. May your dreams be gentle and your sleep be deep.